I just love to create. I love to inspire. XQC watched it, I'll watch it. I actually really like the DB Cooper story. And I haven't seen this one yet. Thanks for the resub, Rick, the Prime, Gregory, and Mustard.
During parachute escape from a flying
Mustard.
727 somewhere between the wings.
A search was made of the plane immediately. We don't know who he was, where he came from, or where he went. I expect that we'll keep looking
Thanks for resub,
until we
Arsenal.
find him or find out what happened.
I love the idea that a YouTuber, like, actually solves one of these things. I'm assuming he doesn't, right? But maybe he does, I don't know.
In the afternoon of November the 24th, 1971, a middle-aged man carrying a briefcase walked into Portland International Airport and purchased a one-way ticket to Seattle, Washington.
Different place, Hyper.
The man identified himself as Dan Cooper, and along with 36 other passengers and a crew of 6, he soon boarded Northwest Airlines Flight 305. Once aboard, Cooper made himself comfortable in the middle of the last row of seats on the right side of the cabin. He ordered a drink and had a smoke, because this was the 70s. Once the flight was cleared for departure, Cooper turned around and handed an envelope to Flight Attendant Florence Schaffner. Inside the envelope was a note featuring a handwritten message stating he had a bomb. Schaffner reluctantly sat down beside him and glimpsed what appeared to be
Christ,
8
this story's
sticks
so
of dynamite
fucking wild.
inside his briefcase. Cooper's demands were quite simple. He wanted $200,000
Thanks for the
in
resub,
cash
Joe.
and 4 parachutes.
Thank
He
you,
also
Bear.
demanded a fuel truck to stand ready to refuel the aircraft once they landed in Seattle. Should they fail to comply with his demands, he threatened to, quote, do the job. Once the flight was airborne, Schaffner went to inform the cockpit crew while
This
another
was in
flight
like the
attendant by name of
60s, so
Mucklow
200K
remained
back
by
then was
Cooper's
nuts.
side. By using a telephone in the rear of the cabin, Mucklow acted as an intermediary between Cooper and the rest of the flight crew.
They're
who were
70s,
remaining
whatever.
behind
Still a
him.
ton.
For the next hour and a half, Flight 305 maintained a holding pattern near Seattle, while local and federal authorities scrambled to procure the ransom as well as the 4 parachutes. 10,000 $20 bills were collected from a local bank, while the
Thanks for
owner of the
resub,
nearby
Meme Daddy.
skydiving school supplied the chutes. At
Yeah, I've seen it,
5:45
Parks
p.m.,
good.
more than 2 hours past its scheduled arrival, Flight 305 finally touched down in Seattle. By this point, it was well after sunset, and the aircraft was brought to a remote section of the tarmac. Once the flight came to a stop, both the ransom and the parachutes were handed over to Mucklow, who then brought them back aboard. In exchange,
How many people
Cooper
were on
permitted
board the
2 of the
plane?
flight attendants, as well as all the passengers, to disembark, many of whom had not yet realized the flight had been hijacked.
36?
With the
60?
ransom paid and only 4
36?
crew members remaining on board, Cooper told Mucklow to inform the captain that he wanted to fly to Mexico City. They were to fly with the landing gear down, the flaps at 15 degrees and below 10,000 feet. The lights in the cabin were to be switched off, and the aft stairway, which opens from the underbelly of the fuselage, was to remain extended. 2 of Cooper's
Thanks,
demands
Resub
could
Nobly.
not be satisfied. First of all, the flight configuration he'd requested would not allow for a non-stop flight to Mexico City. As such, Cooper proposed a refueling stop in Phoenix, Yuma, or Sacramento before they all agreed on Reno, Nevada. Second of all, it was not possible.
It seems
to
like they're
depart
on
the ventral
Cooper's
staircase
side, like, yeah, you can
extended.
take the money and
Cooper agreed
tell us
to
where to go.
retract the stairs on the condition that Mucklow remained by his side and taught him how to extend them once the plane was airborne. Parked for nearly 2 hours due to complications with refueling, Flight 305 was back in the air by 7:36 p.m. Less than 5 minutes after takeoff, Cooper told Mucklow to head for the cockpit and that from this point onwards, he was not to be disturbed. The last time she
The
saw
bomb
Cooper,
turned out to be
he was
fake, though.
standing
Oh,
in the
sorry,
middle
don't
of
mean to
the
spoil
aisle
things.
as if though he was preparing to jump. Mucklow joined the rest of the crew, locked the cockpit door behind her, and some 3 hours later, Flight 305 safely landed in Reno. Once the flight
Sorry.
came to a stop, the crew carefully
I could be wrong, I
ventured
don't
into the
really
rear of
remember
the
that.
cabin, but there was no sign of Cooper, nor the bomb. The aft stairway had been extended mid-flight and was slightly damaged upon landing. It seemed there was only one explanation for the hijacker's absence. At some point between Seattle and Reno, Cooper had strapped on a parachute, walked down the stairs, and leaped into the dark of night.
Thanks, Resub Beat On. I'm not sure, Bear.
As soon as it became clear that Cooper was no longer on board, dozens of FBI agents converged upon the aircraft, only to discover a disappointing amount of physical evidence. A black clip-on tie, 8 cigarette butts, and 2 of the 4 parachutes were all that Cooper left behind. Evidently, he'd brought the ransom and briefcase along with him. In interviews conducted on the night of the hijacking, Cooper was described by the crew and passengers as a white male with brown eyes and dark hair. He appeared to be in his mid-40s and wore a dark trench coat, a dark suit, a white shirt, a black tie, and dark shoes. Soon after boarding, he'd also donned a pair of sunglasses. Based on this description, the FBI produced the first of several composite sketches. Before they could mount a search, however, the FBI had to figure out when Cooper abandoned ship. But that was easier said than done. None of the 4 crew members witnessed Cooper jumping from the plane, nor did the pilots of 2 fighter jets which escorted the flight between Seattle and Reno. It was not all too surprising given it was the middle of the night. Although the flight crew did report something odd, the last communication with the hijacker occurred at approximately 8:05 p.m. when the crew used the intercom to offer assistance, which Cooper declined. Within the next 10 minutes, the crew experienced what they described as an oscillation or vibration of the aircraft. At the time, the crew suspected it might have been produced by Cooper's jump, and a subsequent recreation of the hijacking supported that conclusion. Okay, so that took care of the when, but what about the where? While Cooper was very explicit about the flight's configuration and destination, he never specified any kind of route. In fact, Cooper grew so impatient with the slow refueling in Seattle that he dismissed the captain's request to file a flight plan and simply told him to, quote, get the show on the road. As such, the captain chose to fly along an airway known as Victor 23 without any input from Cooper. By using Victor 23 as a guide, authorities estimated the most probable location of the flight at the approximated time of the jump was about 40 kilometers north of Portland. And so, at the break of dawn, the FBI mounted an impressive search operation using helicopters, airplanes, and ground troops. The problem was, even if the estimated bailout point was accurate, Cooper's eventual landing or drop zone was far more difficult to pinpoint. The
Fuck, it's so cool! This guy's like an actual Galaxy Brain anime villain.
By a dense forest, so it was truly like finding a needle in a haystack. Apart from the difficult terrain, the search was further complicated by low temperatures and inclement weather, which persisted for days. Despite their best efforts, authorities never managed to find a single trace of Cooper, nor the items he brought along with him. Having made little to no progress by early December, the FBI turned their attention to the $200,000 ransom. The money had been collected from the Seattle First National Bank, which maintained a ransom package of $250,000 just for such an occasion. Because of this, the serial numbers of the $10,020 banknotes given to Cooper had been documented in advance, a complete list of which were quickly made available to financial institutions, government agencies, and the general public. The intention was to make it as difficult as possible for Cooper to spend his money. Northwest Airlines and several newspapers even began to offer rewards to anyone who could find a note with a matching serial number. In spite of these efforts, no one ever did. That is until nearly a decade later. In early 1980, a young boy named Brian Ingram was building a campfire on a small beach in southern Washington. As he was digging into the sand, Ingram discovered 3 bundles of cash totaling $5,880. Having heard about the infamous skyjacking, Ingram's parents brought the severely degraded bundles to the FBI. The notes were promptly inspected, and sure enough, the serial numbers matched those of the ransom.
Fuck, big fine, Brian. Imagine being like an 8-year-old, fucking drinking milk, shitting in your diapers, and finding that.
It answered, the most significant of which was how. How did the money end up so far away from the drop zone? Looking at this map, it might be tempting to think that Cooper simply dropped some of the money, which then fell into the Lewis River. The bundles could then have been carried further downstream by the Columbia
Thanks to
River
Resub Crones
before
and the gift
finally
sub
being
PG.
washed ashore at Tina Bar, which is the name of the beach. Tina Mucklow, Tina Bar. Coincidence? Yeah, coincidence. Anyway, the problem with this idea is that the Columbia River flows in the opposite direction. This has led some, including members of the FBI, to re-evaluate the initial drop zone assessment. For instance, if the drop zone was much further southeast, close to a river called the Washougal River, it is conceivable, albeit improbable, that the money floated all the way down to Tina Bar. Alternatively, the bundles may have simply landed on the beach if the flight path was further to the west. Even so, natural explanations struggle to explain how three independent, potentially free-falling and/or free-floating bundles of cash ended up at the exact same place on the same beach. To complicate matters, sediment from the riverbed was excavated and dumped onto Tina Bar as part of a dredging operation in 1974. And according to one analysis, the money was discovered above this layer of sediment. If true, that would mean the money came to rest at Tina Bar sometime after 1974.
What the
But
fuck?
a re-examination of that analysis found that what was believed to be a layer of deposited sediment might actually have been a perfectly natural layer of clay. Not only that, but the sediment was clearly dumped some distance away from where the money was discovered. Furthermore, when Ingram discovered the bundles, the rubber bands which held them together were still intact. This is significant because experiments conducted in 2009 revealed that this brand of rubber bands could not withstand exposure to open air or water for more than a year. So, unless the bundles were somehow protected from the elements, they must have become buried at Tina Bar within a year of the hijacking. The
This is
most
so
probable
fucking
explanation
complicated.
seems to be that Cooper or someone else deliberately buried the money. Did Cooper survive and bury the money himself? Did someone else bury the money after stumbling upon Cooper's remains?
If you're in the chat,
If
DB
there
Cooper,
is
just let me know,
explanation
man.
which
This
does
is
not
crazy.
require human
I
intervention,
want to hear more about it.
It's managed to elude investigators for decades. Suffice it to say,
I
this is
didn't
a
know any of
mystery
this part.
within a mystery. Since Ingram's discovery in 1980, both Tina Bar and the grounds around the Washougal
Here's the Prime
River have
Zex.
been subjected to numerous searches.
I have not seen that,
But
nobly.
to date, there's been no sign of Cooper, nor the rest of the money.
You know, if Cooper was as smart as we think he is, he would have done all of this while having a full beard, and then when he jumped, he would have shaved the beard off. Just
From
to
the
add
very
another
beginning, it was
layer
assumed by
of
many
good
that
ideas
Cooper
to
did
it.
not survive his daring escape. It would not make for a very thrilling conclusion to this story, but that's the thing about stories. They're usually far more exciting than reality. While there is no hard evidence for nor against Cooper's survival, the assumption that he fell to his death is not without merit. When Cooper leaped into the darkness, Flight 305 was plowing through a frigid rainstorm at roughly 170 knots. 10,000
no.
feet above Southern
Oh
Washington.
no!
The wind was so violent that it ripped out a placard from the aft stairway.
Oh, Jesus
which was
Christ.
later
He just
recovered
fucking
in
got
1978,
blasted.
almost directly below the estimated flight path. To say that Cooper was not dressed for the occasion would be an understatement. The ground beneath him, meanwhile, was obscured by multiple layers of clouds, which likely means that Cooper jumped without knowing his precise location. Even if he could see the ground and had a specific drop zone in mind, the parachute he selected was non-steerable, meaning he would not have been able to steer his descent towards a specific landing spot, thus precluding any potential coordination with an accomplice
So many
safely on
problems.
the ground.
He also
While
forgot to
Cooper
account for the
expressed
dragons
some
that hover over
familiarity with
Portland, Oregon.
parachutes, his actual competence level is up for debate.
And also, on
It's
that
widely
night, there was a
believed that
javelin
Cooper
tossing
had 2
competition.
pairs of parachutes, 2 primary and 2 reserve, to make the authorities believe that he intended to take a hostage. That is precisely what happened, as the FBI contemplated, but eventually decided against sabotaging the chutes, as they did not want to risk the life of an innocent civilian. But in their haste to obtain them, they unintentionally provided Cooper with a non-functional dummy chute intended for training purposes. This mishap seems to have gone unnoticed by Cooper, because that dummy chute was one of the 2 missing from the plane. Not only that, but Cooper chose the older and technically inferior parachute out of the 2 primary chutes provided.
Nice.
So in both cases, it seems like Cooper made the worst possible choice. But
Thanks
there
to resub
are
AJ,
other ways
Absolver,
to
and the
interpret
gift
this
sub banana.
information. For instance, it's possible that
Thanks,
Cooper
Cooper.
used the
Read
dummy
some can.
chute not as a reserve, but as a means to secure the bag of money. In fact, that is precisely what Cooper tried to do with the functional reserve chute. First, he tried to place the money in the chute's canopy before removing some of the suspension lines and wrap them around the bag. Perhaps he used the dummy chute for a similar purpose. And Cooper's decision to use the older primary chute is not necessarily an indication of inexperience. It could also be a sign of familiarity, because the chute he left behind was a civilian luxury chute, while the one he used was a military chute. The argument is that Cooper might have been trained as, say, a paratrooper, and chose the older military chute because that's the one with which he was most familiar.
I'm starting to doubt it. I don't think so.
Suspect that Cooper had a military
You could have
background.
given him a giant
When the
pair of
flight was in a
pants and he
holding
probably would have
pattern in
jumped off
Seattle,
holding them.
Cooper mentioned that the
I think he's
McCord
dumb as
Air
fuck
Force
now.
Base was only 20 minutes away from the Seattle-Tacoma airport. At the time, that was an accurate assessment and might suggest a military background. Apart from the potential military connections, Cooper may even have had links to the Central Intelligence Agency.
I doubt
You
it.
see, the type of aircraft which
He was
Cooper
probably
chose
like
to
a
hijack,
Redditor before
a
Reddit
Boeing
existed.
727, was also used by the CIA to covertly drop agents and supplies during the Vietnam War. A task for which the Boeing 727 was uniquely qualified due to its distinctive aft stairway. So it's fairly safe to assume that Cooper chose to hijack a Boeing 727 specifically because it provided a relatively safe means of escape. Whether he learned of this from the CIA or came to that conclusion
Thanks, DBC.
independently is
Never
another
sub
question.
Sugar Daddy.
However, the fact that Cooper chose to hijack a flight operated by Northwest Airlines was apparently random chance. When Tina Mucklow asked Cooper about his motives, he responded, "It's not because I have a grudge towards your airline, it's just because I have a grudge."
Oh, that's
He
kind of
further
fucking
clarified
cool.
That Flight 305 just happened to be in the right place at the
You're
right
not trapped
time.
in here with me.
Even so,
I'm trapped
it's
in here
clear
with
that
frigid
Cooper
weather
came
temperatures and a
prepared.
bad plan.
He seemed to know a great deal about aircraft and aviation. He appeared to be familiar with the local terrain. He maintained a low profile to avoid a panic. He covered his eyes with a pair of glasses to conceal his identity. He left very little evidence behind, and he demanded 4 parachutes to force the assumption that he was taking a hostage. He was even cunning enough to reclaim the note which he'd initially given to Florence Schaffner. Apart from the name he wrote on his plane ticket, there are no other samples of Cooper's handwriting. But for all his planning and cunning, it seems Cooper did not give enough thought to his eventual escape. Not
Yeah, the
only
most
did he
important
fail to
part.
specify a route, but he was forced to
I
make
did
a
it.
last-minute destination
Now I'll just
change
kill
from
myself
Mexico
out here, I
City to
guess.
Reno. He could have demanded more appropriate parachuting equipment like a pair of boots, a helmet, or jumpsuit. He could even have specified the ransom to be delivered in larger denominations to make it lighter and less cumbersome to carry.
Exit Tier 1,
Assuming
Joe.
he did survive the fall and made it safely to the ground, he may then have had to make his way through a dense, partially snow-covered forest in nothing but loafers and a trench coat in late November. I get the distinct impression that Cooper's escape was much more of a leap of faith than a carefully executed jump. On the other hand, authorities never received a
I love
missing
the
persons
animation
report
he
in
has here
action
with
to
it too. He
description
looks
of
like he's
Cooper
really fucking
in the
struggling
wake of the
pulling out.
hijacking. This might suggest that Cooper did survive and that he swiftly and quietly resumed his normal routine. Furthermore, other hijackers have performed similar stunts, and many of them did survive even if they were quickly apprehended. Finally, the simplest explanation for how 3 bundles of cash ended up at Tina Bar is human intervention. At the end of the day, most of this is based on nothing but supposition. Without any concrete evidence of Cooper's demise, it leaves the door wide open to the far more exciting proposition that he did, in fact, survive.
Nah, I've now been convinced that he was a fucking idiot. There's no chance. This man
By
dove
time
off in the middle of the
press deadline
night
the hijacking,
in the
FBI
worst
had
possible
already
conditions. He
begun
should
to
have.
investigate
It's like he jumped into a
potential
volcano.
suspects. Among them was
They would have had a
man
higher chance of
reportedly
surviving
with
that.
Initials DB and surname Cooper. This Cooper was quickly eliminated as a suspect, but due to a mix-up by the press, the name Dan Cooper was confused for DB Cooper, and the rest is history. While Dan Cooper is most likely a pseudonym, there is a comic book series of the same name. The comic is written in French and centers around a Canadian pilot named Dan Cooper. While the comic was not translated into English nor sold in the United States before 1971, it was available in Canada, which has a large French-speaking population. Given that American and Canadian accents can be difficult to
Exit Tier 1,
distinguish,
MD Wall.
it's possible that Cooper, who was described as having no discernible accent, was a bilingual Canadian. This might even be supported by something that Cooper might have said. You see, when the captain relayed Cooper's demands to air traffic control, he used the phrase negotiable American currency. It seems doubtful that an American citizen would specify American currency, so perhaps Cooper was not American. The problem is, we don't know if this is a direct quote from Cooper or paraphrasing by the captain. For instance, notes taken by the crew during the hijacking merely contain the phrase negotiable currency, while testimonies provided by the crew after the hijacking include phrases like $200,000 in cash and circulated US currency. So, Cooper might have been Canadian. And
I think Cooper might have been an alien.
Dan Cooper
At this point, it could be anything, anyone. We could all be D.B. Cooper.
Taken his name from something or someone else. Nearly half a century has gone by since the hijacking took place, and in that time, thousands of suspects have been questioned and investigated. It would obviously be impossible to cover all of them here, but let's take a look at some of the people that at some point or another have been suspected of being D.B. Cooper.
It's just a picture of my dad. This man loves working on old cars.
First became a suspect.
He's never parachuted, but we thought it was worth checking out anyway.
He seems like a solid candidate. He was a decorated Army paratrooper and helicopter pilot. He had experience with explosives. He had an extensive criminal record. He had an uncle named John Cooper who was an avid skydiver.
Whoa.
He was expelled from the army only months before the hijacking,
Whoa.
which might suggest a motive. After all, the hijacker did say he had a grudge. When confronted by journalists and private investigators, Rackstraw would neither confirm nor outright deny that he was D.B. Cooper.
It's him
Instead,
then.
he'd say things like, "I could have been," or "I would not discount myself."
Thanks for the
On
gift
the
of
other
the wall.
hand, Rackstraw had light-colored eyes, which
And
Cooper
thanks,
did
Cooper,
not.
again.
More significantly, Rackstraw was only 28 years of age at the time of the hijacking. This is well outside the range of ages reported by the crew and passengers, most of whom believed Cooper was in his mid-40s. Kenneth Christensen first became a suspect
Thanks,
in
370 for
2003
speed.
when his brother noticed certain parallels between him and Cooper. Christensen had briefly served as a paratrooper in World War II, and since 1953 he'd worked for Northwest Airlines as both a mechanic and a flight attendant. He was 45 years old at the time of the hijacking. He was left-handed, which Cooper might have been. For instance, Cooper used his left hand to interact with his briefcase, and the clip-on
Thanks for
tie
5
he
gift
left
subs,
on board
Mobile.
was affixed with a tie clasp applied from the left. Shortly before he died in
Larissa
1994, Christensen had supposedly told his brother, "There is something you should know, but I cannot tell you." After his passing, his family discovered over $200,000 in his bank accounts. To top it all off, Florence Schaffner stated that photographs of Christensen bore a strong resemblance to Cooper.
Why don't you
On
check the
other
serial
hand,
numbers on that
Christensen
money?
did not match the physical description of Cooper. He was both shorter and lighter. While Schaffner did see a strong resemblance, she remarked that Cooper had more hair, and that is supported by the composite sketches. And there was nothing suspicious about the large sums of money which he simply earned by selling land.
This is the
Richard
70s. It wasn't
McCoy
digital.
first
I'm sure he
became
had
a
it
suspect
physical.
In 1972, when he hijacked a Boeing 727 and escaped via the aft stairway, much like D.B. Cooper. Because of the significant overlap between the two hijackings, some believe they must have been committed by the same person. McCoy used a fake name, he used a fake hand grenade to threaten the crew, he used handwritten notes to issue his demands. Both McCoy and Cooper used the phrase "no funny stuff" as a warning to the crew. McCoy demanded $500,000 in cash and 4 parachutes. McCoy also
What the
bailed out the
fuck?
back of the plane once they passed over his hometown in the state of Utah. Apart from the
What the
similar
fuck?
modus operandi, McCoy had also served in the Vietnam War as a demolitions expert and a helicopter pilot. McCoy did actually survive the fall and managed to evade authorities for 2 full days before he was apprehended and sentenced to 45 years in prison. Before his death in 1974, McCoy refused to confirm or deny that he was D.B. Cooper. On the other hand, McCoy was an avid recreational skydiver and even came prepared with a skydiving helmet and jumpsuit. He gave very specific
Thanks to Tier 1
instructions about the
stubs.
flight path.
We give sub
In addition to
so.
the fake hand grenade, McCoy also used an unloaded handgun to threaten the crew. He failed to retrieve one of the notes he'd given to a flight attendant. He was only 29 years of age at the time of the hijacking. and all 3 flight attendants were quite certain that McCoy was not Cooper. While there are meaningful parallels between these two
That's a
cases,
lot of
McCoy
parallels.
might simply have been a copycat who'd read about D.B. Cooper in the news.
That is a lot of fucking parallels, though. Holy shit.
William Weber first became a suspect in 1995 when, shortly before his death, he supposedly told his wife, "I've got a secret to tell you. I am Dan Cooper." Following his deathbed confession, Weber's widow recalled a number of fascinating details.
Basically gives some
She claims to have
D.B.
found a
Cooper
bank
himself.
bag resembling the one used in the hijacking. She claims Weber had sustained a knee injury after jumping out of a plane. Weber supposedly had a nightmare about leaving his fingerprints on the aft stairs. And a year before the money was discovered at Tina Bar, Weber had allegedly paid a quick visit to the same location. In addition, Weber was a World War II veteran, he had an extensive criminal record, he matched the physical description, and he was 47 years old in 1971. On the other hand, Weber's fingerprints did not match any of the prints collected from Flight 305. Although, to be fair, there's no way to know if any of those prints actually belonged to Cooper. Furthermore, Weber's DNA did not match a DNA sample collected from the tie clasp. But once again, there's no way to know if the DNA on the tie clasp actually came from the hijacker and not someone else. What's so frustrating is that the FBI likely had a much better source of DNA at one point. If you recall, 8 cigarette butts were collected from the scene, and there's
Oh, I
a good
forgot
chance
about
they
that.
were all suffused with Cooper's DNA. The problem is, that evidence was lost at some point, and has not turned up since.
How? What do you do? Shove him up his butthole before jumping off? How did...
William Smith first
How?
became a suspect in 2018. Smith served in the Navy.
I
during
totally
World
forgot
War
about
II
that.
and likely had
Well,
some
they probably did
experience with parachuting. He was 43 years old at the time of the hijacking. He had dark brown eyes. He matched the physical description. He shared a certain likeness with the composite sketches, especially this speculative sketch of an older D.B. Cooper. A student named
That's
Ira
definitely a
Daniel
drawing from his
Cooper, who was
grandson or
killed in World
something.
War II, attended the same high school
That
as
that
Smith.
is just that man.
Smith worked as a
Drawn by his
yardmaster
son.
for a railroad company for most of his life, but in 1970 the company filed for bankruptcy. As a consequence, Smith lost his pension, which might suggest a motive. He could, for instance, have developed a grudge towards the airline industry for their role in bringing about the downfall of the rail transportation industry. It's further speculated that Smith could have used his knowledge of railroad networks to hop on a train and escape undetected. On the other hand, Smith spent his entire life in the northeastern United States, given that the hijacking occurred on the other
Needs to
side
give
of
some
the
King
country
Oso.
and was committed by someone who at least appeared to be familiar
I
with
guess
the local
Colt,
terrain.
yeah.
Smith is not the most ideal candidate. However, the fact that Smith worked as a yardmaster is interesting. You see, the tie that Cooper left behind was recently examined using an electron microscope, which uncovered various metallic particles. Some of these particles, especially pure titanium, were quite rare in 1971. This might suggest that Cooper worked as a manager at some sort of chemical or metallurgical facility, or possibly a rail yard.
I think it's him! The old man!
If nothing else, I hope this limited selection of suspects illustrates just how difficult it is to be certain when you have so little evidence to work
Yeah, that was fucking
with.
fascinating.
These 5 individuals look nothing alike, yet any one of them could be D.B. Cooper. Was Cooper really in his mid-40s, or did he simply look old for his age? Did Cooper really serve in the military?
Yeah, what if they all did it? There was 5 Coopers that kept switching out.
In 2016, the FBI had to admit defeat and officially close down the case. Unless someone stumbles upon Cooper's remains or manages to track down the rest of the money, it seems there is little hope of resolution. Did Cooper survive? I have no idea.
No, he
But as
didn't.
long
No
as that
chance.
possibility cannot be dismissed, the legend of D.B. Cooper will no doubt persist.
Thanks to Prime David. In my professional opinion, I think there's no fucking chance after hearing all of the conditions he would have had to go through to survive, that he actually survived. I think what could have fucking happened is he jumped out of the plane and just got split in half and gored by just awful temperatures. He probably went through like a fucking swarm of locusts too with everything he was saying was going on at the time. I think there's no chance that man fucking tapped down on the ground. He fucking died mid-flight. Make sure to smash that like button. Thumbs up, ring the bell, tell your mom I said hi. I love to inspire. Thanks for the gift sub, King Sloth. Yep, very familiar, Papa. Sure, Johnny.
In early 1959, a group of hikers decided to head out on an expedition across a mountainous region of Western Soviet Union. The group consisted of 9 experienced men and women greatly familiar
For the
with the
record,
Siberian wilderness.
new information about the Yatlov
Yet,
has
this
surfaced over the
adventure
last few months.
would prove to be their last. Despite a criminal investigation, photographs and journal entries, the case remains unsolved after more than half a century. This is the case of the Yatlov Pass.
Hey, thanks for the 5 gift subs, Spicy Meat. Fucking tier 3 and gift subs, man. Thank you. Thanks for the gift sub, Lick.
In the early morning of January the 23rd, 1959, a ski and hiking team of 10 boarded a train headed for the Ural Mountains in the middle of the Soviet Union. The group consisted of 8 men and 2 women,
Hey, Big
with
T's, hope you're
Igor
doing well.
Dyatlov as the group's leader. As the train slowly advanced deep into the mountainous Siberian taiga, the group diary received a final entry. I wonder what awaits us on this hike. Will anything new happen?
Oh.
Over the next few
Jesus.
days, the group continued to alternate between modes of
These are 5 gift subs,
transportation.
Red Rockstar.
First a bus,
Thank you, Rockstar.
then a truck, then a horse and sleigh, and eventually they proceed on foot and skis. On January the 28th, one of the hikers named Yuri Yudin had begun to feel quite ill and eventually decided to head back, while the remaining group of 9 continued as planned. These photos were taken just before they parted ways, and it would be the last time he saw his friends alive. The group resumed their expedition across the snow-covered outback and documented everything of note using diaries as well as multiple cameras. Recovered photos and journal entries suggest that the trek progressed as one would expect, with no unforeseen complications. Just lots of snow, bitter cold, and an increasingly arduous landscape. On February the 1st, they reached the foot of a mountain known to the indigenous Mansi population as Dead Mountain. They spend the better part of the day progressing up the slope
Very on
and
the
eventually
nose.
decide to set up camp only a few hundred meters from the peak.
Thanks for 5 gift subs, Extinct.
These are some of the last photos recovered
Thank you,
from the
Extinct.
cameras, and the last sentence of the final entry reads, "It is difficult to imagine such a comfort on the ridge, with shrill, howling wind hundreds of kilometers away from human settlements." A few weeks later, friends and relatives begin to worry. No one has heard from Igor or any of the other members of the group. After much
Never heard
debate,
that
a
one,
team
Mouse
of
Eye.
volunteers eventually head out to find them. On February the 26th, the search party is finally able to locate the camp on the slope. It's obvious to the first at the scene that something has gone horribly wrong. The tent is in scrambles, covered by a thin coat of snow. The hikers' belongings and equipment was found orderly placed inside the tent, but the tent itself had been slashed open with a knife from the inside.
Oh.
The next day, 9 pairs of footprints lead the search volunteers down the slope towards the nearby
Tier 1
woods.
Ethan and Resub
Given
over.
that the footprints left rather mild indentations in the snow, would suggest that they descended the slope in a rather calm and orderly fashion, as opposed to running away in panic. The footprints could be tracked for about half a kilometer from the tent until the trail was completely covered by snow. So they continued in the direction of the trail and under a large cedar tree at the edge of the forest, next to the remains of an improvised campfire, they found the frozen bodies of Yuri
let's just not
Doroshenko,
take any chances.
Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonoshenko. It would take over
Thanks to
2
Prime
months
Squirting.
for the bodies of all 9 hikers to be recovered. The first 2 were found severely underdressed. No jackets, no pants, no gloves, hats, boots or anything else one might expect given the frigid climate. Only light shirts, underpants and socks. At the time of their death it would have been around 30 degrees below zero. The cedar tree had signs of damage as if someone had climbed it, with branches broken up to 5 meters high.
Perhaps they were attempting to locate a tent in the pitch
Yeah, I know
darkness,
XQC watch
or
that I saw.
perhaps
That's like
they
one of the
were
first
trying
things
to
that comes
hide
up when you
from
type in the out
someone
loud.
or something. The next 3 hikers were found at varying distances between the tent and the tree, covered by a few centimeters of snow. They were better dressed than the previous 2, but not by much, as they still lacked essential items
Thanks
such
to
as
Resub
boots,
Key and
hats,
Robert.
and gloves. They were all found facing the direction of the tent as if they were struggling to return
It's for
at
Twitch.
the moment
I'm not
of
taking a
death.
chance.
While some of them had sustained minor injuries, all 5 had died of hypothermia. It should also be noted that 4 of them had died while intoxicated. The last 4 hikers were found at the bottom of a small hill, covered by 3 meters of snow, 75 meters from the tree.
Again, a lot has come out
opposite
about this over the
direction
last
of the
few months
tent.
from what I remember.
3 of them had sustained lethal injuries. 1 had a fractured skull, and 2 had fractured multiple ribs and suffered massive internal bleeding.
Thanks to Prime Squanch.
The medical examiner believed the injuries had been sustained from a fall and compared it to a car crash. The injuries had been sustained while they were all alive and could not have been inflicted by another person. 2 had also been found with gaping eye sockets, and 1 of the
Jesus.
women had a missing tongue. The last of the 4 had
What?
a broken nose and a deformed neck, but died of hypothermia. The most mysterious of all, 3 articles of clothing were later found to be abnormally radioactive. On May the 28th, the criminal case was discontinued
What?
with a cryptic and incredibly vague conclusion.
Okay, I think
The
that's
lead
it.
investigator writes in the final report, "The cause of death was an unknown compelling force,
Actually,
which
hold
the
on.
hikers
Let me
were
double
unable."
check.
Most satisfying answer and barely a conclusion at all. So,
Thanks to
just
Resub,
in case the
Bloopy
Galactic
and
Empire
Luffy.
had nothing to do with the death
The
of the
Prime
hikers,
Tuki.
is it possible to explain some of the more enigmatic details in a less vague yet credible fashion? Let's give it a shot. The fact that Dubinina was missing her tongue has been taken way out of proportion. Some say that it was cut off or ripped out while she was still alive. Others say it was eaten by scavengers after death, while some even claim the tongue was later found somewhere else. But I've read the medical reports, and this is what it says. The diaphragm of the mouth and the tongue is missing. That's it. There's nothing about cutting or ripping or anything. I don't know how or where it began, but there seems to be an exaggerated importance placed on this missing tongue, while in reality, it's a rather minor detail. At least the medical examiner believed it to be a minor detail, otherwise he would likely have elaborated further. For example, the same section of the same report states, "Gaping orbits, the eyeballs are absent." Equally mysterious, right? Well, no, because the medical examiner does provide an explanation for both. Soft tissue injuries to the head are post-mortem changes to Dubinina's corpse, which was recently exposed to water prior to detection. He even adds putrefaction and decomposition in parentheses to clarify exactly what he means. And this was not even exclusive to Dubinina, as the 4 last bodies were all damaged due to the melting snow. Now, some
Makes
claim
sense.
that her tongue must have been removed while she was
can we
still
really rule
alive,
out Sasquatch?
and pointed to the fact that she had about 100 grams of blood in her stomach. But that's not exactly true either. The relevant portion of the forensic examination reads, "The stomach contained up to 100 cubic centimeters of a dark red, slimy mass." That's about 10 centiliters of something, most
Makes a
likely
good sub
food,
crusade.
mixed with something red, most likely blood. So we don't know how much blood was in her stomach, just that there was blood in her stomach. Which isn't that strange, given that she was suffering from massive internal bleeding.
Thanks to Resub
One of the most
Cubular.
mysterious aspects of this case is that 3 separate articles of clothing discovered on 2 of the bodies were found to be radioactive. Which does indeed sound a bit mysterious, but you have to keep in mind that almost everything is slightly radioactive. So we need more details.
True.
The radiological studies claim that under normal circumstances, an area of 150 square centimeters should not exceed 5,000 disintegrations.
Everything is
per minute.
radioactive, literally
Only
everything.
3 articles of clothing exceeded or equaled that limit at 5,000
They were
DPM,
fucking nuked. Yeah, that's
5,600
probably what it
DPM,
was.
and 9,900 DPM. The only explanation given in the report is that the clothes were contaminated as radioactive dust fell from the atmosphere, or the clothes were susceptible to contamination when in contact with radioactive substances. In other words, they were unable to determine exactly how the clothes were contaminated, but it's not unrealistic to believe it to be a result of natural processes.
Not really
But
before we
just
made
in
nukes,
case
FYI.
It wasn't due to the elements, there may
Bro,
be
you're just
an
outright
alternative
wrong. Wait, what?
explanation. Kolevatov had previously worked at a facility
You think
developing
nukes made
nuclear
radiation?
materials, and Krivonoshenko had previously worked at a top-secret plutonium production plant for nuclear weapons. And the 3 articles of radioactive clothing belonged to Kolevatov and Krivonoshenko. Around the time of the hikers' disappearance, numerous sources claim to have seen UFOs in the form of orbs of light
shit.
moving across the night sky for a few
Aliens.
seconds up to several minutes. These include 3 soldiers and 2 different hiking
Three
groups.
Subsoto
Some
and
witnesses also
Alexander.
claim that the indigenous Mansi population, as well as a group of geologists, had told them that they had observed fireballs in the sky around the time of the incident. The problem with UFO sightings is that they are, well, unidentified and often unverifiable as a result.
Which means
Only
they have to
one
be
of
true.
the hiking groups reported to have seen the UFO during the night of the incident, while the other sightings occurred before or after. Then there's this. This is the very last photo taken with one of the hikers' cameras. It appears to be a photo of some type of light source taken in the middle of the night.
What if it actually is
Unfortunately,
aliens?
the photo is about as undescriptive as the UFO it is claimed to depict. It could no doubt be a
True,
photo
Eddie.
of a
That is
UFO,
true.
and it could no doubt be a photo of a candle, flashlight, fire, stove, or anything else. But let's assume that it is a photo of something in the night sky. What could it potentially be depicting? I can think of a few possibilities.
Thanks,
A
Reese.
rocket,
Chunk
a piece of a
and
rocket,
Masteries.
man-made space debris during re-entry, a crashing aircraft, or perhaps a meteor. None of which would be too surprising given that this is the Soviet Union in the middle of the Cold War as well as the space race, so there would have been a lot of aerial activity. At the time when space exploration was about as fresh as a prince living in an affluent LA neighborhood, it's not surprising that people were unable to identify the mysterious lights. Regardless, it could not have landed close to the hikers as it would have been found by the search teams. And if the object had already been recovered, there should have been evidence in the form of a crash site, footprints, and other activity on the ground. So, given the fact that there is no obvious connection between the UFO and the hiker's disappearance,
Thanks, Reese.
I
JF
put this in
and
the
Fiani and the
spooky
Prime
red
Dwarf.
herring box. So, what happened? Why did they leave the tent? Why was it slashed open from the inside? How did some of them sustain such major injuries while the others simply succumbed to the cold? Why were so many of them underdressed?
Avalanche.
I think the biggest mystery is how it's been able to remain a mystery given the abundance of information. So after spending the better part of this month hiring multiple Russian translators reading through a massive amount of material ranging from theories about a KGB cover-up to a simple avalanche accident, this is what I believe to be the most credible
Let's see if he gets it right, because there
explanation.
is an explanation now.
First of all, why would they leave the tent? That seems to be the most important missing piece of the puzzle. I would argue that the only thing that could make them leave would have to be an immediate threat inside the tent. If something was outside, such as an animal or a UFO, then there would be no reason to cut the tent open. There were no signs of an avalanche, however, they could have escaped believing an avalanche was tumbling towards them. The problem with that theory is that the footprints show them walking in a calm and orderly manner down the slope, as opposed to running away in panic. So
Thanks, Reese.
something
Pickle.
caused them to panic inside the tent, but once outside, they calmed down and made a conscious decision to walk down the slope. Now, take a look at this photo. The pipe sticking out of the tent entrance is the exhaust pipe of the internal stove. This was a completely unique and homemade design as the leader of the group had built the stove himself. We know they had used the stove on the night of the incident before the incident took place, as partially eaten pieces of fried ham and bacon were found inside the tent. I think that after disassembling the stove and removing the exhaust pipe, the embers inside the stove were accidentally reignited. As the exhaust pipe had been removed, the smoke would have filled the tent in seconds. As they attempted to get control of the flame, they cut a few holes at the top of the tent to vent the smoke.
Damn, this guy's
when
a
that
genius.
didn't work and it became increasingly difficult to breathe, the side of the tent was slashed open and they all escaped in a state of panic. There's even more evidence to support this theory. Several members of the group were found with burn marks on both their bodies and clothing,
just
which
in
could
case they
definitely
show
have been a
bodies.
result
Not
of
gonna
the
risk it.
improvised
Which could
fire
definitely
under the
have been a
tree,
result of the
or
improvised
perhaps
fire
a
under the
scalding
tree,
hot
or
metal
perhaps
stove.
a
Some of them
scalding
were
hot
also found
metal
with blood
stove.
around their
Some
mouth,
of them were
and
also found
coughing
with
up
blood
blood
around their
could be a
mouth,
symptom
and
of
coughing
smoke
up blood
inhalation.
could be a
Then
symptom
there's
of
this
smoke
photo taken the day
inhalation.
before.
Obviously
Then
been
there's this
burned,
photo
but the
taken the
question
day
is
before. How? It's possible that sparks from the stove had accidentally set the jacket aflame. Okay, so they make it outside and quickly realize what a terrible situation
Thanks to
they're
give some
in.
Shane and the
Sub-zero
big 2-2
temperatures,
Kid Freud.
no shelter, underdressed, in the middle of a snowstorm, in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere. At this
21st
point, I think
birthday,
one or
take a
more
hint.
of them made a decision to
Happy
head for
birthday.
the nearest shelter, which they would have known to be the woods. The reasoning behind this decision is likely multifaceted. The smoke from the tent could have made it impossible to stay within its proximity, and/or the smoke may have caused them to believe that the tent was on fire. Some of them were intoxicated, which could have affected their judgment as well as their sensibility to the cold. And they may also have believed to be closer to the woods than they actually were. So they finally reached the woods and immediately set out to make a fire. Some climbed a tree and scavenged the surrounding area, while those who are more properly dressed head a bit deeper into the woods.
Thanks for
About
supporting,
75 meters from the tree, 4 of them trigger a minor avalanche, taking them over the edge of a ravine with a drop of about 3 meters. As the bottom is filled
Just in
with
case.
rocks and ice, they sustain lethal injuries. 3 of the other 5 hikers decide to head back for the tent, while the remaining 2 slowly freeze to death around a fading flame.
That theory makes a ton of sense, and I haven't kept up with the Dyatlov discoveries here, but like I said, I remembered recently there was a huge resurgence in information and explanations for this, so let me just check to make sure there's no pictures of bodies. Okay, this looks good. So this comes from Smithsonian Mag. Alright, let's see. This is just an overview. Oh, here we go. An abominable snowman attack. That seems like a cool theory. We do not claim to have solved the Dyatlov Pass mystery, as no one survived to tell the story. That's just what a man who solved the mystery would say, being very coy. But we show the plausibility of the avalanche hypothesis. An avalanche, a snow slab, or a hurricane. Thanks to Tier 1 Zion and Prime Huso. Official findings suggested a torrent of snow slabs or blocky chunks surprised the sleeping victims and pushed them to seek shelter at a nearby ridge. Unable to see more than 50 feet ahead, the hikers froze to death as they attempted to make their way back to their tent. Critics of the slab avalanche theory cite 4 main counter-arguments. The lack of physical traces of an avalanche, more than 9-hour gap between the hikers building their camp, a process that required cutting into the mountain to form a barrier against the wind, and their panicked departure, the shallow slope of the campsite, and the traumatic injuries sustained by the group. Asphyxiation is more common cause of death for avalanche victims. Okay. So this guy proved that a snow slab could have wiped through the area without leaving many traces. A slab avalanche, excuse me. Alright. Jesus, they really went in on this. Got a whole little fucking graph. Well, not graph, a whole little picture. Researchers unraveled the final piece of the puzzle, the hiker's unexplained injuries, with the help of a surprising source, Disney's 2013 film Frozen. I'm starting to doubt how accurate this conclusion may be. If Elsa did it, but I'll continue. He was so impressed by the movie's depiction of snow that he asked his creators to share their animation code with him. This simulation tool, coupled with data from cadaver tests conducted by General Motors in 1970 to determine what would happen to the human body when struck at different speeds, enabled the pair to show that heavy blocks of solid snow could have landed on the hikers as they slept, crushing their bones and causing injuries not typically associated with avalanches. If this was the case, the pair posits those who had sustained less serious blows likely dragged their injured companions out of the tent in the hopes of saving their lives. Okay. Thanks for the resub remark. The slabs of snow would have had to be incredibly stiff and moving at a significant speed to inflict such violent injuries. He adds that the research doesn't explain why these people, after being hit by an avalanche, ran off without their clothes into the snow. True. If you're in that type of harsh environment, it's suicide to leave shelter without your clothes on. True. For people to do that, they must have been terrified by something, and I assume one of the most likely things is one of them went crazy for some reason. Can't understand why else they would have behaved in that way unless they were trying to flee from someone who's been tracking them. I mean, yeah, I guess that really wasn't as conclusive as I thought it would be. Thanks to Prime Darko and Resub Prime. Oh, DB Cooper. Yes, I didn't even think of that. Maybe it was DB Cooper. Don't know if I've seen that one yet either, R. To be honest, Lamino's theory actually sounds more plausible. This, I'm doubting that one now. Let me just double check there's no bodies here. Now I'm interested. Yeah, no bodies. Is it not just hypothermic psychosis? Well, no, because it all happened while they were in their tents warm, supposedly. They cut out of the tent and all took off into the night. They wouldn't be suffering from hypothermia inside with a stove and clothing and everything. That really wouldn't add up. Oh no, this one also talks about slab avalanche. And it also cites Frozen. Yeah, I don't know. Who knows? That is very interesting. Very interesting indeed. Make sure to smash that like button and thumbs up, ring the bell, tell your mom I said hi. Yeah, that's about it. See ya. I just love to create. I love to inspire.
Just let me know.
In the spring of 1806, two German astronomers were independently observing Venus when they noticed something odd.
Giant-titted aliens.
The hemisphere facing away from the sun did not perfectly blend with the blackness of space. Instead, it had a faint glow with a grayish-red or ashen-gray appearance. This ashen light resembled a phenomenon known as earthshine. It's when sunlight reflected by the earth faintly illuminates the night side of the moon. It seemed reasonable, therefore, to ascribe the ashen light to a similar cause, namely that sunlight reflected by a Venusian moon was faintly illuminating the night side of Venus. Only one slight problem: Venus doesn't have.
Oh, it was an invisible spaceship.
This meant the
Activated
ashen
cloaking
light
tech.
resembled Earthshine in appearance only because there was nothing in proximity of Venus to reflect any sunlight.
Yeah, let me know.
In
It's
the words
amazing.
of famed astronomer William Herschel, those regions that are turned from the sun cannot possibly shine by a borrowed light. A few decades later,
I'll check it out.
another
but
German
not on
astronomer,
stream.
Franz von Gröthausen, proposed a rather creative solution to this mystery. The
Blow up
ashen
the
light
Venus.
was the result of sweeping wildfires on the surface of Venus, deliberately ignited by its inhabitants. As absurd as that sounds, there were tantalizing similarities between Venus and Earth. The two planets were of similar size, and much like the Earth, Venus had an atmosphere, a densely cloud-laden atmosphere which gave astronomers and science fiction authors alike free rein to speculate about what could lie beneath. A barren desert, a planet-wide ocean, a tropical rainforest. Anything was possible. It was in this context that Gröthausen made his proposal in 1836. He believed that Venus was inhabited by a humanoid species who would periodically light fires on the surface.
What an
The
interesting
purpose of
theory.
which was either to clear land, to commemorate a religious occasion, or to celebrate the coronation.
Apparently we've been getting
of a
dumber
new
because of
Venusian
lead, but look at
emperor.
where we came from. Fucking
Gröthausen did
idiots.
perhaps get a bit carried away, but he was far from the first to suggest that Venus was inhabited. Titans of astronomy like Christian Huygens and William Herschel envisioned all the planets, including Venus, to be teeming with life. And it took a
Here's
long
Prime
time
Luke
for
Hammer,
this
there's Carbo.
romanticized image to fade. In 1916, this illustration appeared in American newspapers with the caption, "A remarkable drawing by Mr. Winsor McKay, illustrating the conditions of Venus as astronomical science now believed."
There were actually people on.
Even well into the
Twitter and
space
other
age, we still find echoes
Planet-wide
of
exodus.
this earthly perception.
They
In
realized Huygens was
1967, a
onto them.
Soviet spacecraft plunged into the clouds of Venus to attempt a landing on its surface. Well, the probe did not survive the descent.
Maybe
It
Prime
was
Julian.
actually designed to float in case of a water landing. History is ripe with stories much like this one, largely forgotten stories that once upon a time promised to end our cosmic solitude. Bygone visions of life asunder, long since quelled by newfound wonder. Venusian fire festivals were not the cause of the ashen light, but observations continued to be made. By the end of the 19th century, some 24 observations have been recorded. But some astronomers would dedicate years to the study of Venus without ever catching a glimpse of its elusive glow. Instead, they would often be greeted by these vague streaks and patches. They covered large portions of the planet and appeared to be features on the surface, lurking beneath the clouds. At least that was the opinion of American astronomer Percival Lowell. Far from the diffused shadings reported by his
Percival
peers,
was a great name.
Lowell could discern a distinctive network of branching spokes. It is as if a bright veil of some sort were drawn over the whole disk. These spokes of Venus bore a striking resemblance to markings observed on both Mercury and Mars. The features on Mars were especially distinct and remarkably linear.
So someone was graffitiing them.
Lowell had been somewhat unimpressed by the spokes on Venus, but he became nothing short of obsessed with lineae on Mars. There are celestial sights more dazzling,
No,
spectacles
we're
that
in
inspire
Texas.
more awe, but to the thoughtful observer who is privileged to see them well, there is nothing in the sky so profoundly impressive as these canals of Mars. Owing to their striking linearity, Lowell could reach but one conclusion. The Martian canals must be the workings of an intelligence. He carefully laid out his arguments in 3 lengthy books filled with these intricate maps
he was a
and
scam
illustrations.
Damn,
The Martian canals represented a vast irrigation
Yeah, he's
network
the original
designed to
L. Ron
carry
Hubbard.
melted ice water from the poles
Man tried to make
down
early
to the equator.
Scientology. Yeah.
While many were understandably skeptical, the idea that Mars could be inhabited was an extremely compelling one, perhaps even more so than Venus. Legendary science fiction author H.G. Wells famously wrote The War of the Worlds, a fictional story about the Martian invasion of Earth, first published in 1897. But a decade later, Wells published a speculative non-fiction article titled The Things That Live on Mars. Inspired by Lowell's fanciful interpretations, Wells goes on to envision the habitat, society, and appearance of real
Man, you fucking
Martians.
dumb.
To
Exit
Wells
Prime,
and many others,
nerd.
the existence of Martians was not just possible, it was probable. Indeed, to some, it had already
Ooh,
attained
that's a good
a veneer
one,
of
too.
truth. In
love
1891,
old
the
alien
French
things.
Academy of Sciences
There's
was
actually this
bequeathed a
great
sum of 100,000
movie that,
francs
I watched
by a
the other
wealthy
night in the
Parisian
hotel.
widow. The money was to be awarded to the first person who found the means of communicating with another planet, with the notable exception of Mars, implying that communicating with Martians would have been far too simple of a challenge.
That's awesome.
The reality of the Martian canals was difficult to ascertain as they resided at the very limits of perception. Telescopes were never quite good enough to conclusively prove nor disprove their existence. A book commissioned by NASA as late as 1965 stated that, although there is no unanimous opinion concerning the existence of the canals, most astronomers would probably agree that there are apparently linear markings on Mars. Indeed, maps of the Red Planet published by the US military that very same year featured sprawling networks of canals.
Man, we're really blasting through the timeline here. Alien factor.
A towering
Sounds
Atlas Agena
intense.
rocket is the launch vehicle that hurtles the Mariner into the heavens. Scientific apparatus on the Mariner will try to measure the density of the planet's atmosphere, and a television camera will seek to make photographs of its surface, giving
Those are
man
some bliss.
his first close-up look at Mars.
In Joseph.
The American spacecraft Mariner 4 transmitted the first close-up photographs of the Martian surface
Looks
in
like
the
shit.
summer of 1965.
Boo, Mars is
Despite
boring.
the complete
Boo,
absence
don't
of
even
any
see any
linear
fucking cell phone
markings,
towers.
scientists at
Trash.
NASA were
Fucking cringe.
unwilling to give up hope. Nothing positive concerning the existence or lack of canals can be concluded on the basis of the Mariner 4 photographs. Hesitation and dwindling hopes aside, the Martian canals had come to an end.
The canals, the cities, the Martians are all gone. Imaginative inventions, optical illusions.
As early as 1903, had an experiment found that groups of students seated a few meters away from an illustration like this one could discern fine, straight lines where none existed. The experiment demonstrated that non-linear markings viewed from a distance could evoke a linear appearance. This sort of visual inference is even said to be apparent in certain photographs. I mean, look at this. Not only is there a clear correlation between this sketch and this photograph of Mars, but you can almost see these barely perceptible lines snaking across the plains.
But what does that all mean
The
for the
spokes on
alien
Venus,
ecosystem?
meanwhile, bear a curious resemblance to the inside of an eye.
Oh,
It appears that Lowell constrained the aperture of his telescope to such an extreme that the blood vessels inside his eye began to cast shadows,
I guess if it
some
had
of
like
which might
9
have fallen onto
eyes.
Lowell's retina, creating the illusion of labyrinthine markings on distant worlds. It is as if a bright veil of some sort were drawn over the whole disk.
What does this mean for the trout population? Good question.
Whether it
Is
was
there
optical illusions, indistinct shadings on the planets, turbulence in the atmosphere, technological limitations, or an untempered willingness to believe, these networks of lines were merely figments of the mind. There is something incredibly tragic about these old misconceptions.
That they were
I mean, there
wrong.
was a time
Embarrassing.
not so long ago when life beyond meant life right next door. There's still hope of finding less complex forms of life on a select few planets and
These are
moons,
some
which is
scoots.
very exciting, but also a far cry from a tropical Venus or an Ecumenopolis on Mars. As our knowledge of the universe
I think
continues
it'd be
to
so
expand,
underwhelming if all
so
we
too
found was
must
like
our
a small
search
little
for
bacteria
cosmic neighbors.
out in space. Can't even talk to it. Wouldn't even speak English.
By the mid-20th century, the Asian light had been observed by not dozens, but hundreds of observers, many of whom were as experienced as they were adamant of the phenomenon's existence. Despite this
Executive
preponderance of eyewitness accounts,
Prox.
the lack of any empirical evidence attracted a fair amount of skepticism. In fact, the doubts have plagued this phenomenon since the very beginning. Italian astronomer Giovanni Riccioli is often recognized as the person who discovered the Asian light. In early 1643,
Holy shit, this... What? God damn it, it just scrolled up. Holy shit, this video is far off. How can people publish these lies? It's literally a history lesson. What do you mean? What do you think happened in history, I guess? What lies? That's a genuine question. I'm super curious. Because it's not like he's giving any, like, takes or anything, or misrepresenting it. It is literally the history of how astronomers once viewed Venus and the theories that came along with it. And he even cites the sources in the video. Even, like, let's say in, like, a far-off possibility that everything outside of Earth is CGI, it still wouldn't change that there's nothing being lied about in this video. It is still just a history lesson of what the astronomers were saying and how they arrived there. The history is cool, but the talk about aliens is far off, and we all know this. He was saying what the astronomers said. What are you talking
That's
about?
exactly what an alien would say.
What the
too.
fuck? He was just saying, like, the astronomers believed that it was probable that there were aliens on Venus or Mars due to them seeing the Asian light as well as canals. Keep in mind, these are 200-year-old people. These are primitive. They're not as smart as you with the C+ and AP biology or whatever, but he's just going over, like, where it came from. Did you mean... Okay, maybe I misunderstood. It's fucking 5 a.m. Maybe I Do you mean the video creator, Lamino, or do you mean the old-timey people? Because maybe there's a disconnect. I thought you were talking about Lamino, but maybe you're talking about primitive man. The astronomers have learned over the years most of the stuff they learned wasn't correct. I enjoy the history of the video creator. Sorry. Even more... Yeah, I don't know. Old humans are dumb. Agreed. They don't even have Google. Like, fucking virgins.
Ritually witnessed a band of colors enveloping the disk of Venus. The night side was tinted greenish blue, enclosed by a semicircle of light. Ritually ascribed the vivid colors to light being refracted inside his telescope, an effect known as chromatic aberration. In other words, Ritually thought the faint glow on Venus was an optical illusion. Okay, so a quick aside, I managed to find an observation that, to my knowledge, has gone completely unnoticed and actually predates the one made by Riccioli. A German priest and scholar named Athanasius Kircher wrote in
God, what a
1660 that he
picture.
too had observed a band of colors on Venus. No date was given, but Kircher did provide a location, Palermo, Sicily. Based on historical records, Kircher paid his last and only visit to Palermo in the spring of 1638. So Kircher observed the Asian light 5 years before Riccioli and should thus be credited with its discovery. Okay, back to the video. Riccioli's doubts about the Asian light echoed through the centuries, and by the 1900s, it was not uncommon for sightings to be dismissed as a mere trick of the eye. Not only were observations infrequent and unpredictable, but they were often inconsistent. Brightness, color, and the extent to which the night side was illuminated could vary drastically between accounts. With no hard proof of its existence and a lack of concordance between those who had seen it, the Asian light appeared destined to join the ranks of myth and misconception. But in 1975, the Soviet spacecraft Venera 9 became the first to successfully orbit Venus. Diving into the shadow of this faded twin, it detected faint flashes of light emanating from the clouds below. Venus and Mars have historically been the two prime candidates for cosmic neighbors, but the other planets have not gone completely ignored. Scottish astronomer James Ferguson had few reservations about life in the solar system. When it came to Mercury, for instance, Ferguson thought that Mercurians simply possessed greater resilience to heat. It is very likely that the people on Mercury have the same opinion of us as we have of the inhabitants of Jupiter and Saturn, namely that we must be intolerably cold and have very little light at so great a distance.
If only you knew, Fergie.
Inspired by
you
Ferguson's optimism, William Herschel took it a step further. In 1795, Herschel confidently announced that the inside of the sun was home to an alien civilization. This might
Damn, they'd be
seem
fucking
incredibly
so
bizarre, but at
powerful.
the time it was
Like
not
Superman
uncommon to
when he locked
view the
himself in
sun
there.
as an enormous planet encased by a luminous atmosphere. Herschel expanded upon that idea by regarding sunspots as openings in this flaming shell that momentarily exposed the true surface underneath. This concealed surface was richly stored with inhabitants who were shielded against the immense heat by intermediate layers of clouds. We have great reason to look upon the sun as the most magnificent habitable globe.
What's crazy to me is that these old primitive theories are somehow less crazy than the modern ones from people
Like
that...
flat earthers and stuff.
Yeah, it's fucking wild. Like, the conspiracies that we come up with now blow these old ones out of the water, despite the people having no reason to believe, like, any of it was not plausible.
I told you about that time I interviewed the guy who believed aliens lived on the moon. Up in like near Aberdeen, Scotland.
No, I don't think he said that.
He literally would take pictures from, like, you know how there's like Google Earth,
Yeah.
Google Moon images, take a screenshot, put it in Photoshop, and use the high pass filter on it, which basically turns the entire image to all gray and then finds the edges, right? And then he would take that, do the high pass filter on it like 6 or 7 times so it would create like really hard edges and be like, do you see this? This is a map of the underground. Like, you can't see it unless you use this filter. And I wanted to be like, oh my God. But we were so scared we were going to die if we didn't finish the interview because the guy was a whack job. But we sat there for like 2 hours listening to this guy. And it was, yeah, you're right. People have some pretty interesting theories.
Maybe he was right, though. We haven't really checked for, like, underground railroad systems on the moon yet.
Apart from the planets and the sun, another bygone candidate for intelligent life is the moon. Using stunning contraptions of tubes, wires, and lenses, pioneering selenographer Johannes Hevelius produced some of the earliest detailed maps of the lunar surface. Whereas you and I see a barren landscape devoid of life, Hevelius espied upon the moon a near perfect copy of Earth. Mountains and valleys, rivers and lakes, swamplands and woodlands, islands and capes. This vivid interpretation
Photoshop
refers
is
to an
far
ancient
more
belief
reliable.
that bright and dark patches delineate continents from oceans. In fact, this fallacy is still reflected in the nomenclature we use today. Dark plains on the moon all have aquatic names, such as the Ocean of Storms, the Lake of Dreams, and the Sea of Tranquility.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Though water never filled these gloomy basins, it's not entirely inaccurate to call them ancient seabeds, for they are the volcanic scars left behind by vast oceans of molten rock, making the Lake of Death.
How can you
an
explore other
especially
galaxies
apt
but can't
name.
explore the rest of the ocean?
While Hevelius never observed any
Yeah,
creatures on the
the
moon,
aliens
its
are in the
subjective
ocean.
resemblance to the
That's
Earth
for sure. I
convinced him that
I always
Lunarians
liked that
must
idea in
exist,
Pacific Rim, that
a
in the
conviction
deep
still
ocean
being
there's just
upheld more than a
fucking
century
aliens.
later by who else if not William Herschel.
I mean-
I hope and am convinced that sometime or other very evident signs of life will be discovered on the moon. It didn't take long for these very evident signs to make themselves apparent. I am almost convinced that those numberless small circuses we see on the moon are the works of the Lunarians and may be called their towns.
Just
Herschel nearly convinced himself that the cratered landscape of the moon had been engineered by its inhabitants. Craters or circuses were not the remnants of violent impact events, but skillfully constructed towns and cities. While Herschel obsessed over circular dwellings, astronomers like Franz von Gröthesen espied
wow, what a
habitats
name.
of all shapes and
I thought you were
sizes.
about to try and say it.
This
No, he
star-like
said it. It
structure
sounded awesome.
appears to be a
Franz von
kind of
Gröthesen.
temple, and because of its star shape,
Fucking
perhaps
awesome.
it is dedicated in service to the stars. The circle in the south, the two highest mountains in the north, and the two hills in the southwest are natural objects, but it is highly probable that these embankments serve as the dwellings
There's
of
a beauty.
sentient beings on the moon. In reality, Gröthesen mistook some oddly shaped terrain for intelligent design.
Oh.
The increasingly speculative nature of these extraordinary claims
Mistake that could
culminated
happen
in
to
a
anyone.
truly incredible sighting by John Herschel, the son of William Herschel. Whilst gazing upon a rock formation on the moon, we were thrilled with astonishment to perceive 4 successive flocks of large winged creatures. They were like human beings. Their wings possessed great expansion and were similar in structure to those of the bat.
So he just
The moon was
fucking,
evidently home
he's just
to
lying.
species of
Now he's just
walking
lying.
and flying man-bats. This was a truly profound, if not bemusing, discovery, not just for the world, but also for John Herschel. Because upon being inquired about this remarkable find,
Those look like the monkeys
John
from
responded
Mr.
with
Bob.
confusion. He had no knowledge of any
Jesus Christ.
man-bats on the moon. It turns out the story had been fabricated by an American journalist named Richard Locke. Locke had sought to lampoon the often frivolous debate about life on other worlds, perpetuated by the likes of William Herschel and Franz von Gröthesen. Instead, the great moon hoax of 1835 convinced thousands around the world that the moon was inhabited by bat-like humanoids, unicorned bison, bipedal beavers, as well as, well, storks and
Yeah.
goats. There's also this image of a man-bat besat flat upon the back of a fellow man-bat televacked by a pack of man-bats. As to why this guy is copping a whiff, history has declined to answer.
It's a pretty cool fucking picture, though. I wish those aliens were on the moon. Bro, if those aliens were on the moon, there'd
As
be
time
no
went on
doubt
and
people would be
telescopes
just
improved,
like
it became
killing them
increasingly difficult
relentlessly.
to argue in
Just
favor
because they
of the
don't
moon's
like the way they
habitability.
look.
With
Fucking
no
sniffing
apparent
buttholes and
atmosphere,
shit.
this dry and barren wasteland seemed an improbable abode for life as we know it. But by the mid-19th century, the life debate had been resurrected by a new hypothesis about the shape of the moon. The argument was that gravitational forces had stretched the moon into the shape of an egg. This uneven distribution of mass meant that any atmosphere or fluids would have coalesced on whichever side was closer to the center of gravity. If that happened to be the far side of the moon, an argument could be made for its habitability. As one author put it, though the near hemisphere is a lifeless desert, having neither water nor air to sustain life, the hidden hemisphere may have a teeming population. Among the proponents of this
And he
radical
was
hypothesis
right.
was none other than John Herschel. An egg shape would fully account for the total absence both of air and of water on the side of the moon turned towards us, and would be quite compatible with the abundant existence
You
of both
gain
and of a
immunity
habitable
from
hemisphere
shit by
on the
licking
opposite side.
ass.
Ew.
Had history played out differently, perhaps
Don't
we'd be
think that's
dealing with
scientifically
egg
correct.
mooners
The
instead
more
of flat
ass you
earthers
lick,
at this
the
point.
less
No, but that's
hurt you
lunacy.
are by
While
shit, I
skeptics
guess.
made quick work of the egg-shaped moon hypothesis,
sense to me.
far-side inhabitants could not be
Jeez.
so easily dismissed. After all, the far side of the moon is unseeable from Earth, and thus ripe for
Said I've seen
speculation.
dogs do it.
Well, then I subjected them to a spectrographic analysis. It's dust. A great amount of radioactive dust.
Larry, what you're saying is that somehow, for some reason, the moon has been encircled by a ring of highly radioactive dust?
Something's going on the other side of the moon, the invisible side.
This is reminding
Something
me of
that we
Moonfall.
ought to know about.
By placing aliens on the far side of the moon,
Neither have I.
early science fiction authors were able to
haven't
skirt the
seen Dark
line
Side of
of
the Moon.
plausibility.
Oh, you were talking about
Aliens wanted
Moonfall.
to conceal
Oh,
their presence
yeah,
and perhaps observe humanity from a distance. This
These are the
cosmic
bits.
blind spot was the perfect
Joe.
hiding place. At least that was the opinion of famed American astronomer Carl Sagan.
Hey!
It is not out of the question that artifacts or even some kind of base is maintained within the solar system.
Did he really say that?
Base.
That doesn't sound
Humanity's
like...
detection, it might have appeared preferable not to erect such a base on Earth. The moon seems one reasonable alternative site for a base.
Humanity got its
Anything you would
first
ever
glimpse
believe.
of the far side of the moon in late 1959,
base?
when the Soviet spacecraft Luna 3 relayed these images back to Mission Control. Subsequent
Moon
missions
is just
improved
hiding
upon
her
quality,
pussy on the other side.
but alas, revealed nothing but more moon. But this idea of concealment lingers to this day. Many are still holding out hope that somewhere in the solar system, the ruins or technology of some unknown intelligence lie waiting to be found.
God, I hope that's accurate.
In 1988, the Soviet Union launched a probe known as Phobos 2. As the name implies, part of its mission was to investigate the Martian moon, Phobos. The probe arrived at Phobos without any major complications, and in late March of 1989 began preparations to plant 2 instruments onto its surface. But then, contact with Phobos 2 was lost. In the weeks and months that followed, rumors began to circulate. Puzzling features and shadows were said to be visible on some of the final images transmitted by Phobos 2, the nature and origin of which supposedly defied explanation. Through various articles, conferences, and television programs, these images were gradually unveiled to the public. They appear to depict an unidentified craft in orbit around Mars. It was said to be an
Looks
alien
like a
spaceship
little
that had
stain.
attacked and disabled Phobos 2. Not only that, but it cast an enormous elliptical shadow upon the surface of Mars.
Okay, that's interesting.
The Eye of Sauron, eh?
Но эта тень появилась действительно неожиданно, и что это такое, мы сразу не поняли. И, наверное, не очень хорошо обратили на это внимание, потому что дальше она опять, увидите, продолжается в виде полосы такой.
То есть это не предмет, висящий над поверхностью, а это, видимо, тень все-таки на поверхности планеты?
Наверное. Потому что, то есть это не полностью перекрывается, так сказать, сигнал от поверхности Марса.
Это похоже на ракету, взлетающую из поверхности Марса, и после которой еще остается инверсионный след. Как вы к этому относитесь?
Но если дать волю фантазии, то, конечно, можно найти и такие объяснения. Но мы склонны видеть совершенно реальные, хотя, может быть, еще до конца не объясненные обстоятельства, которые породили вот такой вот след. Скорее всего, это все-таки тень от какого-то объекта на поверхности, потому что сквозь тень просвечиваются элементы поверхности.
The mystery persisted for about a decade or two until the raw data from the Phobos 2 mission became readily accessible. The unidentified craft looked an awful lot like an overexposed transmission artifact.
Oh.
In fact, all the infrared images featured the same white streak.
Yep. God damn it.
Meanwhile, the elliptical shadow belonged to Phobos. Its elongated shape was due to multiple scans of photographs being taken in sequence before assembling the final image. Stories like the Phobos incident have become rather par for the course. Some initial event or discovery leaves an information vacuum which is immediately filled by fantastical speculation.
Yeah,
a
the
printing
speculation
artifact
is
becomes
always
a tower on the
fantastic.
moon. The happenstance of light and shadow begets a human face on Mars.
Fucking cool.
And these prominent boulders
Sequel,
from both
Panda.
Mars and Phobos conjure images of a certain Stanley Kubrick film. More recently, a Chinese rover on the moon captured this image of what some described as a hut. Upon closer inspection, everyone was absolutely gobsmacked when the hut was exposed as a rock. Whether you are
What
an
if they're just
amateur
really
or
short
professional,
aliens?
have no experience or decades worth, you're never quite immune to this kind of
They just live in the
self-deception.
rocks.
When you want something to be true, it can be deceptively easy to convince yourself that it is.
Yeah.
Remember that prize money, the
Yeah.
100,000 francs
That's science
offered to
somewhere
anyone
in
who
there.
discovered a means of
Yeah.
communicating with another planet, excluding Mars. Well, in 1937, there was a claim on that prize. The claimant was none other than world-renowned inventor Nikola Tesla.
He died a virgin.
In 1899,
He fucking died
Tesla
a
had been
virgin, what an
experimenting
idiot.
with wireless radio communication.
Stupid fucking virgin.
During some of those experiments, he picked up some rather odd transmissions. Although I could not decipher
Exhibits,
their
Coco.
meaning,
Sleep
the
well.
feeling is constantly growing in me that I have been the first to hear the greeting of one planet to another. A purpose was behind these electrical signals. Tesla described the signals as a repeating sequence of either 3 or 4 pulses. Decades later, Tesla was still convinced that he'd received an interplanetary message and had even deduced its origin. The signals consisted in a regular repetition of numbers, and subsequent study convinced me that they must have emanated from Mars. I believe the Martians used numbers for communication because numbers are universal. Then, in 1937, Tesla announced his plans to unveil a new technology capable of not just interplanetary but interstellar communication. With such impressive technology at hand, Tesla felt confident that he'd soon be awarded the 100,000 francs. I intend to claim the Pierre Gussman Prize. I am just as sure the prize will be awarded to me as if I already had it in my pocket. They have got to do it. They didn't do it. The prize was instead awarded to the crew of Apollo 11 in 1969. As for the alleged message from Mars, well, we don't really know. While Earth was much quieter back in 1899, it was still far from radio silent.
Wow, that's a cool noise. Shit. That one sucks. It just sounds like wind. Jupiter's cringe. Get off the air. I hate this radio station. Just sounds like footsteps. Boo!
Footsteps. They're coming closer to us.
Yeah, boo. Fuck 'em.
Perhaps it was nothing but the rumbling noise of a distant thunderstorm. Upon sailing into the shadow of Venus in 1975, Venera 9 detected faint flashes of light. The emissions were broadly consistent with lightning, but it's a matter of interpretation. Data gathered by subsequent missions are likewise consistent with Venusian thunderstorms, yet fall short of any conclusive evidence. Presuming that lightning does occur on Venus, could it explain the ashen light?
I don't think it
well,
could.
It's been
The
estimated
only
that
explanation
the
for
night
the
side of Venus
ashen
would
light
need
is
to
a
maintain a
highly
rate of
advanced
some 1,000 light
civilization
strikes
of
per
aliens.
second to yield a glow
Perhaps
that's
even using
visible
Mass
from
Effect
Earth.
relays to
That's more
travel.
than 20 times the mean rate on Earth, and would likely have been observed a
I
long
think
time
Yugen
ago.
was correct
In the blunt words
initially.
of another paper, lightning is not
Or
acceptable
was it
as an
Herschel?
explanation for the ashen light. But in certain parts of the world, there is another striking phenomenon illuminating the night sky.
Aurora
These
Borealis.
vibrant curtains of light are the result of charged particles ejected by the sun
No, but it is
colliding with the
cool.
Earth's magnetic field. Could something akin to
These
the
are some
northern
starlight.
lights be responsible for the ashen
that
light?
I've been scanned.
Aurorae have indeed been observed on
It's also
planets like
encouraged
Jupiter
carbon
and
dogs, so-
Saturn, so
Okay, so maybe
it might seem like an obvious solution. What makes it not so obvious is that the magnetic field around Venus is virtually non-existent. It is extremely weak and transient and is generated by a completely different process than here on Earth. In spite of this, when caught in the
recent
path of
Kathy.
a solar storm, Venus has in recent years been observed to glow.
That's fucking awesome.
The underlying mechanism of this glow is still poorly understood, but there is an apparent link between solar activity and diffused emissions of light on the night side of Venus. Not only that, but there is a weak correlation between solar activity and ashen light observations. According to author John Barentine, who's written the definitive book on the subject, the data are inconclusive, but there are hints in this figure that something is indeed up. The apparent spike in the number of ashen light sightings in the 1950s correlates with one of the strongest solar maxima of the past 250 years.
Okay, so we're getting somewhere. As
While all of
Wi-Fi
this
signals
sounds quite
increase, so
promising,
too does
it's a bit
the
too
maxima.
early to celebrate. Nothing conclusive
I
has been
think is what
found,
he's
and
saying.
despite many attempts to do so, the ashen light has never been recorded on camera. Until that happens, this nearly 400-year-old mystery remains in limbo. Should it be ascribed to the atmosphere of Venus or the mind of the observer? Perhaps we should have listened to Giovanni Riccioli from the very beginning. Perhaps it is nothing more than a convincing illusion.
Yeah, I think it's an illusion. I don't believe in anything. Ever.
At all.
The search
Nothing.
for cosmic neighbors continues. Many scientists now believe that both Venus and Mars used to resemble Earth in the distant past. Perhaps a relict biosphere or the remnants of a once teeming population can still be found in Venusian clouds or Martian soil. There's mounting evidence that the Jovian moons Europa, Ganymede and Callisto, along with Enceladus and Titan of Saturn,
Man, I've
all
heard
host
none
a
of those.
vast subglacial ocean. Could resilient microbes or even larger organisms have found a way to thrive beneath the frozen crust? Who knows, an apparent hut on the moon or a monolith on Mars might one day match our most outlandish expectations. Even if Earth should prove the sole harbor of life within the solar system, every dot in the night sky has the potential to host another. And with the launch of the James Webb Telescope, there's no telling what secrets are about to be unveiled. Always remember that if at first you don't understand, it's definitely aliens.
Let me know. Yeah, he always does really well done videos. He spends months on them. Yeah, no, he spends a lot of time on them. You need special proteins like frogs have that don't allow ice crystals to form quickly. Those are the ones that fuck you up. Yeah, they like burst all your cells or something, right?
That's interesting. So maybe witches were onto something. Frog stews and everything.
Maybe. All I know is we're not there yet. Maybe we could find a different way of preserving, like formaldehyde. Just like dumping people in formaldehyde chambers. And they wake up all gooey and yucky but alive. Can we pickle humans? See, someone gets it. I bet with enough dedication and resources, we could find a way to like actually pickle humans. Make sure to smash that like button and thumbs up, ring the bell, tell your mom I said hi. Yeah, that's about it. See ya.